Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome doctors to AIOC 2021. And starting with this session, I would like to invite our chairperson, that is Dr. Parulam M. Deshpande. So I welcome Dr. Parulam Deshpande to take over this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanvi.
Yeah.
Thanks all. I welcome all the participants, the speakers and the delegates to this session on the lids and ocular surface, which will mainly focus on the meibomian gland disease. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, so I'm the chief coordinator for this instruction course. I'm Dr. Parul Deshpande. So I am the medical director, cornea cataract surgeon at Sarvodaya Eye Care Experts in Mumbai. And I will be talking about introduction to infrared meibography and evolving technology and its clinical interpretation. The next speaker is Dr. Aditya Pradhan, who is consultant cornea and external diseases from Disha Eye Hospital, Kolkata. He has done his formal training from Sankara Eye Care Center, and then he has pursued his fellowship in cornea at Disha Eye Hospital. And now he's continued to be a consultant at Disha Eye Hospital. He would be talking about the general perspective of meibomian gland disease, so its clinical presentation and management in general. So the next speaker is Dr. Sujata Das, who is a consultant cornea and anterior segment surgeon from LVPEI, Bhubaneswar. She's also a director, Drishtidan Eye Bank at Bhubaneswar. She's also an LVPEI trained, and then she has pursued her cornea fellowship from two other places, that is one from Germany and then later from Australia. Now she is a consultant at LVPI Bhubaneswar. She would be talking about heat therapy and mechanical expression, the available gadgets and techniques. The next speaker would be Dr. Nitin Balkrishnan, who is a phaco refractive surgeon and a chief medical director at Saideep Eye Clinic and Crystal Vision Laser Center in Mumbai. He would be talking to us about role of IPL therapy in MGD-related ocular surface disease, a case-based discussion. The next speaker would be Dr. Karishma Wadia. She is a cornea, cataract, and refractive surgeon at Jehan Eye Clinic in Mumbai. She has also done her formal training from Narayan Netralaya, and I think she's in practice in Mumbai since last 5 years. And she would be talking to us about a role of Lipiview in the meibomian gland disease, its impact on cataract and refractive surgery outcomes. And the last speaker would be Dr. Nupur Goel. She is an oculoplasty and comprehensive ophthalmologist, currently based at Noida. She's also done her formal training from LVPI and is also trained at Nair Institute at Mumbai and at Jaipur. She would be talking to us about tackling those bumps on the road, advances in management of chalasia. Now with this, we go to the introduction of the talk. So as we all know, from the TFM Ocular Society dues to guidelines, that the most common presentation of dry eye disease, the most common cause is either the evaporative dry eyes or it's a mixed form of the dry eyes, which is nothing but due to meibomian gland disease. And in the next 1 hour, we will be talking about the role of meibomian gland disease in the diagnosis as well as the management of dry eye disease. So the first speaker is myself. So I'll just restart sharing the screen once again. So can you all see my slides? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah, so I would be basically talking about the technique of meibography and its clinical interpretation. So coming to the structure of meibomian glands. So as we know, these are linear vertically oriented glands, which are about 3 to 4 millimeter in its size. These are longer in the upper lid as compared to the lower lid, and they extend from the lid margin to the opposite margin of tarsus. They are perpendicular and they are present in the posterior lamella of the lids. It's a tubular acinate structure. So if you can see here, these are the acini, the blue are the acini, which secrete the lipid containing substance, that is mebum. This is secreted into the ductules, and these ductules connect to the main duct, which in turn then drains onto the ocular surface through the meibomian gland openings. So the importance of meibomian gland is that it secretes the lipids, which forms a very important component of the tear film, and it helps us achieve a good tear stability, and it also helps improve the tear breakup time, and hence maintains a very healthy ocular surface. So the video you can see, the top one is a lipid interferometry, and the down one was the NIBOT, which you can record on any of the topographer. So coming to meibography, it is a non-invasive imaging of the meibomian glands done in vivo. It allows us the gross as well as the microscopic examination of meibomian glands. So how does it work is that the meibum, which is secreted in the acini and the ductules, these scatter the infrared light, which is used in the infrared meibography, and hence cause the meibomian glands to appear opaque and white in the meibography images. Now, the extent of the whitening that you see depends upon the amount of light scattering, and this also depends upon the nature of the lipid droplets. So if you have small lipid droplets in the acini and the ductules, the light scattering will be more, and hence you will see the glands to be more prominent as compared to in the areas where there are large lipid droplets or there are no lipid droplets, which would appear as dark areas on meibography. There are two techniques of meibography. The older one is the contact meibography, where a direct application of a light probe is done to the skin of the eyelids. This helps in everting the eyelid, as well as it trans-illuminates the eyelid, and hence we can capture the images of the meibomian glands. Here, the meibomian glands appear as dark structures as compared to the indirect meibography, where it appears as white. Now, this technique was not so comfortable because the patients are not very comfortable and it's more time consuming. So what came into picture was a non-contact type of meibography, which was introduced in 2008 by Arita et al. So the first one was used in combination with slit lamp bimicroscope, where an IR camera and the was used to capture the images. Now, this technique is faster, it's easier to use, it's more patient-friendly, and one can view a larger surface area of the everted eyelids and hence be required to capture fewer images. There are a variety of machines which one can use to capture. It needs to have the IR camera. So any autorefractometer which has an IR imaging can capture can give you a meibography, or a topographer like a Sirius or an Oculus, or a slit lamp based. Or currently we have the machines which have an integrated meibography along with the other dry eye modules, which can be used to capture meibography. So this is a normal eyelid showing a normal meibomian glands. So you can see that from the lid margin up to the lower portion of the tarsal plate, we can see the meibomian glands. You can see the acini, you can see the ductules here. So what is commonly seen in a pathological case is a meibomian gland dropout on a meibography. So we do have an age-related meibomian gland dropout, which is considered to be physiological. So MGD workshop has proposed cutoff values. So those who are under 20 years, they should not have any dropouts if they are normal. And those who are above 20 years, they should have less than or equal to 25% dropout, which is considered as normal age-related dropout. Anything which is more than 25% should be considered as pathological. So the clinical significance of the meibomian gland dropout is that it helps us differentiate between a dry eye disease and a normal eye, especially if you have diagnosed this based on the clinical OSDI score. It also helps us differentiate between the aqueous deficient and the evaporative dry eye disease. So it's been seen that if you have a MEBO score of value of 3, it's about 50% sensitive and 65% specific for the meibomian gland disease. The meibomian gland dropout also correlates well with lipid layer thickness, the non-invasive tear breakup time, the ocular surface index, as well as the age. And hence, it can help us to monitor the disease progression, as well as can help us in some way the monitor the therapy of the treatment which has been instigated for the meibomian gland disease. Though there has not been a very good evidence, but it's seen that meibomian gland dropout does not predict very well the effectiveness of the therapy like latent heat goggles or warm compresses, and hence it may not be a good predictive biomarker. The meibomian gland dropout can be graded. There are a lot of scales which are available. So you could have a MEBO score, which you can see on the top screen, where it can be graded from grade 0 to grade 3, depending upon no gland loss, less than 1/3, 1/3 to 2/3, or more than 2/3. Or by a MEBO scale, where it can be graded from 0 to 4 degrees, depending upon the percentage loss. So if you have 0%, it's 0 degree. Degree 1, which is less than 25%. Degree 2 is between 25 to 50. 3 is 50 to 75%, and more than 75% is considered as a degree 4. So this is the clinical pictures of the meibography images. So you can see the left-hand top is the normal meibogram, where you can see that all the glands are normally oriented, and you can see that they are present, they are occupying the entire upper eyelid. As compared to the lower left image, where you can see that there is significant amount of shortening or dark areas that you see, which is about 25 to 50%, indicating about moderate loss. And the top right shows about 50 to 75% loss, where you can see significant amount of meibomian gland dropouts. And the image on the right hand bottom shows almost near total meibomian gland loss, indicating that there is a severe degree of meibomian gland disease in this patient. Besides the meibomian gland dropout, there are a lot of other morphologies that we see on the meibography. These are depicted here. So one can see the distortion of the glands, or one can see even the increased tortuosity, or one can see the hooking at the ends of the meibomian glands. There may be shortening of the glands, there may be tadpoling, or when there are increased area of losses, you can see the abnormal gaps. One can even see the glands to be thickened. So if you see the acinine structure to be very prominent, then these are the thickened glands, or one can see even a thin gland. So when you see the less intense thin down glands on the meibography, it is a thin gland. So these are some of the clinical pictures. So you can see the top left and the right show the areas of dropout as well as shortening of the meibomian glands in the lower lid and the upper lid. The picture in the middle on the left shows the thinning of the glands. So you can see that these glands are present, but they are probably more of the ghost meibomian glands. The picture on the left and down shows that there are presence of concretion. So these are the calcifix images that you can see with the lucent area, the dark areas around, indicating probably the accumulation of fluid and the calcium deposits. The picture on the bottom right is showing a lot of tortuous glands, more thickened glands, as well as you can see the hooking of the glands here. Now, we do not know the significance of these morphological features, but I think a continuous evolution of this technology will help us know better about these morphology in reference to the Meibomian gland disease. So, meibography alone may not be very diagnostic in all cases. So, the most important factor is the Meibomian gland dropout. However, when you see a low Meibomian gland dropout, this in combination with a poor tear breakup time, a poor gland expressibility, a poor lipid layer thickness can help us diagnose a Meibomian gland disease. It can also help in some of the other conditions. So it can help us differentiate between a chalazion and a sebaceous carcinoma. So a chalazion is seen as a localized, well-defined dark area where you would see in between the highly reflective dots, which are either the fatty granules or the calcific areas. Whereas in sebaceous carcinoma, you will see a poorly ill-defined hyper-reflective area, which may or may not have the nodular regions in the glands. It's also been used for a therapeutic basis. So Stephen Muskin has been using this technology for the probing of the Meibomian glands to open up the glands which are blocked and are not patent. So to conclude, it's a good diagnostic tool. However, its exact significance of all the features are still not clear. It can be a good documentation tool, especially if we need to explain the patient about the existence of Meibomian gland disease in their eyes. Its therapeutic significance is not conclusive, and Meibomian gland abnormality on meibography in presence of higher OSDI score, low expression of the gland or the altered expression, low NIBUT, low lipid layer can help us diagnose a Meibomian gland disease and would indicate the treatment. Thank you. So with this, I would like to invite Dr. Aditya Pradhan to share his screen and his presentation.
Yeah. Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Parul, for the kind introduction and the inclusion. So the topic for today is basically the presentation and management of Meibomian gland disease. Excuse me. So by definition, it is a chronic diffuse abnormality of the Meibomian glands. So it's commonly characterized by terminal duct obstruction and or changes in the glandular secretion. And this may result in the alteration of the tear film, then symptoms of eye irritation, clinically apparent inflammation, and ocular surface disease. So if you see the prevalence and frequency, it varies, but the numbers are quite high, as you see by the highlighted box here. If you see the Indian data, all the studies have pre-pandemic, it is ranging from 10.3 to 47.7% of the sampled population. So it is the Meibomian gland dysfunction is characterized into two states, low delivery and high delivery. The high delivery part are the rare cases we hardly see in the Indian population. Acne rosacea is there, but it's difficult to appreciate in the whitish complexion of the Indian subcontinent. The most common part which we see is the one in the middle, the obstructive part, in which because of any inflammatory disorders, either it is primary or secondary, the orifices of the glands are obstructed, leading to alteration of the tear film and subsequent tear film changes. So you can see the etiology, either it is non-cicatricial or cicatricial. So the cicatrizing disease is more severe. It is either due to some skin disorder, atopy. Basically, there is the scarring of the submucosa and the posterior migration of the orifices. In the long term, the management of the cicatrizing variant is extremely difficult. So these are the few of the manifestations of the meibomian. You can see the pouting of the glands. Here you can see on this photograph the toothpaste-like secretions. Here you can see the dilatation of the orifices with the telangiectasia surrounding them. Here you can see the posterior migration of the orifices in the cicatrizing form of MGD. There is one disorder which not many of us are familiar with. It is called as meibomian keratoconjunctivitis. So the name implies that both the cornea and the conjunctiva are affected. So starting from anterior, there is anterior blepharitis, which is seen characterized by crusting and lash loss. In the posterior blepharitis, you see oil stagnation in 100% of the cases. There can be orifice abnormalities in 50% of the cases, and a foam kind of a thing if you see carefully at high magnification on the lid margin. Also, there is reduced tear secretion. The Schirmer is usually less than 10, and 100% of the cases have a reduced tear breakup time. SPKs are also widely seen. You can pick them up nicely on the rose Bengal staining, but it is quite irritating to the ocular surface. So fluorescein or lissamine can also suffice. The ocular surface as a whole is inflamed with bulbar injection. So most of these patients you will see at the lateral angles, near the canthus, they'll keep on telling you that this redness somehow doesn't go down. So beware of this entity called as meibomian keratoconjunctivitis. And the clinical associations can be seborrhea or seborrheic dermatitis. So also ask them if they have any skin disorders as per se. Another variant along with the MGD is something called as plus disease. So plus denotes something extra in over and above the MGD, and you need specific different treatment for each of these plus conditions. So it can be a exaggerated inflammatory ocular surface disease, for which on the right hand side you see you need soft steroids. If there is mucosal keratinization, you may end up needing a BCL or a scleral contact lens. If there is a flicten, again you need steroids. If there is a trichiasis, basically in the cicatrizing form, either you need a epilation or a cryotherapy in the long term. Chalazion will be discussed sequent in the last talk. If there is anterior blepharitis, you need a combination of topical antibiotics or antibiotic steroids. If Demodex is associated along with the blepharitis and you see cylindrical dandruff on slit lamp, you have to prescribe tea tree oil scrubs. So any of these is called as a plus disease. So there is a way and an order of performing the tests in diagnosing MGD. You start with the questionnaires, you see with and without a slit lamp, then you see the tear breakup time, then you go to the staining, which is followed by looking at the morphology, the margin of the lids, then you express the secretions of the meibomian glands, give a 10 minutes break, and the last test is the most invasive generally, that is the Schirmer test. So you ignore this photograph, you just was on the table which I'm showing now. That is basically the summary of the MGD staging used to guide treatment. So you have stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and also you have the plus disease which I have shown earlier, whose treatment is a bit different. So in stage 1, the MGD grade is basically very minimal alterations in the expressibility and the secretion quality of the oil. And symptoms are usually not present. The staining is also not present. So it is very mild. As you move on till stage 4, the secretion quality, the expressibility worsens, like the toothpaste secretion I showed earlier. The symptoms are also very marked, and the staining is also marked. Mostly it is, apart from the diffuse stain, it is more concentrated in the center. So now you have the severity levels, level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So that was the staging. This is the severity grading. So here you have level 0, there are no symptoms. Level 5, it is symptomatic all the time. It is very disabling. The patient is extremely disturbed. If you are in the habit of using the OSDI, at level 5, the score is almost from between 33 to 100. The tear breakup time at level 5, it is instant. As soon as you see instill the dye, there is a breakup spot seen. Osmolarity is generally not done, not advised, because it is a highly difficult test to perform, in the sense that the results are not easily interpreted. It's very variable. And the staining, again, severe staining at level 5 If you see the MGD grade also at the last stage, it is extremely cicatrizing and very poor quality of the secretion. And the treatment varies as per the severity, as we all know. So if you come to the stage 1 in detail, so no symptoms, very minimal change in the secretions, no stain. So just inform the patient about the nature of the disease, some lifestyle modifications, and also consider basic eyelid hygiene and maybe including warm compresses at home. At stage 2, very minimal to mild symptoms, very mild changes in the secretion, and diffuse grade staining is between 0 to 7. So apart from the lifestyle changes shown above, improve the ambient humidity, change the lifestyle if they're especially heavily dependent on the computer, and increase the dietary omega-3 fatty acid, eyelid hygiene, warm compress. And if there is a plus disease, you have to go for artificial lubricants, maybe topical antibiotics as well. We currently don't have any drops which contain the lipids. At the stage progresses, you have to keep on adding the drugs, maybe oral tetracyclines, anti-inflammatory, including pulse steroids. These will be subsequently shown in the next talks. These are the heating pads and the other devices, including LipiFlow. One controversy is whether you should give omega-3 fatty acids or not. One review which came out last year has shown a moderate daily dose may be beneficial for MGD. But the 2018 article from the DREAM project has shown no benefit of omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. Currently, in my practice, I do prescribe a small dose of oral omega-3 fatty acid in the more severe disorder. Also, like the photographs that Dr. Parul showed in the end, so the DREAM project again did not get any association of the gland morphology with the symptoms and signs of dry eye disease. So we still do not know what the different manifestations of the morphology mean in terms of the treatment and the prognostication. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya, for a wonderful presentation. So I think we will be taking the all the question answers at the end of the session. So I would invite Dr. Sujata Das to present her talk. We can see your presentation, Sujata.
Yes, Dr. Sujata.
Yes.
Can you make it a full screen, Sujata?
Yes, I'm doing it. Yes. Good afternoon. So Aditya has already described how to take care of mild disease, moderate disease based on its severity. So I'll be speaking only on the heat therapy and mechanical excretion. So by this time, all of us are known that meibomian gland dysfunction is a main cause of evaporative dry eye, and that too is obstructive type. Is most common in MGD. It is characterized by meibum in change in composition of meibum and duct obstruction. Sometimes it may be associated with aqueous deficiency dry eye disease. So basically, whatever therapy has been described conventionally is to improve environmental humidity, change in dietary omega-3 fatty acid, artificial tear, and anti-inflammatory therapy. Final goal of therapy is to improve the flow of meibomian gland secretion. So heat and mechanical massage increases meibum secretion. Traditional warm compression requires repeated warming, which usually every 2 minutes, because it does not take sufficient continuation of temperature. It's time consuming, thereby leading to lack of compliance and ineffective treatment. In general, physiological melting point of meibum is 32 degrees centigrade. However, it increased to 45 degrees in meibomian gland disease. And due to increased melting point, whatever warm temperature therapy should be close to 45 degrees. Various gadgets are available for meibomian gland disease. They are divided into warming eyelid devices, which are again divided into warming devices, warming and humidity device, and warming and massaging device. And only massaging devices are available: cleaning device, light-based device, massaging and light-based device. We go to purely warming eyelid device, which is not associated with any compression device. It's MGD treatment eye bag, the eye bag instant, eye express, eye hydration system, tear care system, Mevo thermoflow system, and hygiene insta. And these are few eye warming and humidity devices. So I'll be restricting to my talk warming and massage devices. This is two component. One is apply heat to eyelid to liquefy mebum, and then apply mechanical pressure to deliver mebum to ocular surface. Basically, LipiFlow system, which is by Johnson & Johnson. I don't have any financial interest. This is eyelid warmer, which applies heat, and eye cup, which applies pulsatile pressure through an implantable air and blood. This is a new treatment, comparatively new, approved by FDA in 2011. The automated thermodynamic device for in-office like OPD treatment. It delivers precision controlled heat around 42.5 degrees centigrade directly to palpebral conjunctiva. This is a brief video showing how it works.
Sujata, is there an audio there? We were not able
Yes.
to hear. We were not able to hear actually that audio.
No?
No.
Okay.
Could others hear? I don't know whether my internet
Yeah, I could hear.
No, actually the internet is stable, but I guess there's a problem from Dr. Sujata's side.
Okay.
Anyway, this short video shows how it works.
Sujata, can you speak up for the video? I think because we are just not able to hear. If it's possible, yeah.
Okay, so how it is unique compared to other warming devices? Here the heat is applied directly to palpebral fissure of the eyelid, as opposed to other device where it is used to outer eyelid surface. And this device is designed to minimize heat transfer to ocular surface, unlike other form of eyelid heating. Forceful expression of pressure is applied to eyelid and meibomian gland during the heating phase rather than after the heating phase. The discomfort is usually minimal, unlike really pain during manual expression, and the expression pressure is not transferred directly to the eye. How do you check how is the outcome for any intervention, any medical management or surgical management? In this case, the relief of symptoms and signs, relief or decrease in symptom and sign, meibomian gland function, lipid layer thickness, tear breakup time, and corneal and conjunctival staining. There are conflicting results of change in lipid layer thickness after treatment. So normally this treatment is for 12 minutes. This is also known as BTP, single vector thermal pulsation. This can improve meibomian gland function, ocular surface staining, TBUT, and relieve ocular symptom. The duration of treatment actually variable. This may last for 1 to 3 years. Again, because of various parameters may work till variable time. So there are studies which says about meibomian gland secretion score BUT and symptom improved at 9 and 12 months compared to baseline. The improvement is only sustained only for meibomian gland secretion score and symptoms after 3 years. Although there are many parameters which are there, which is improved till 12 months, but only meibomian gland secretion score and symptoms till 3 years. And Peen and co-worker reported improvement in ocular signs 6 months after treatment, such as lipid layer thickness, number of lead parallel conjunctival fold, and bulbar conjunctival redness. The comparison with other equipment and traditional lead hygiene has shown, this is compared to traditional eyelid hygiene. This is at least as effective as improving subjective symptom, either application of warm compress daily for 2 weeks. Another study has shown that it is effective as twice daily for 3 months. And this study has proven if you give doxycycline 100 milligram twice daily for 3 months and single BTP session is similar. And with other gadget like hygiene and breakfast steam, which is a humidity and warm device, there's a significant reduction of tear evaporation rate after 4 and 12 weeks of treatment, in contrast to hygiene and blephastim. And iLux is another equipment which is from Alcon. And both of them is compared, both treatment produce significant improvement in meibomian gland function and symptom. However, there is no difference between two. There is one study which says which cases it will work better. Gender, in case of female, it works better. And if the baseline dry eye disease symptom is more, it does not work so well. Similarly, baseline NIBUT is more, it works less effective. However, if you see, none of these studies, whatever I have described, none of them are double masked. So the placebo effect may be there to decrease the subjective symptom. And although there is no double mask study, but no study has found that it is less effective than other treatment. So to conclude, it appears to be safe and effective treatment. However, the cost of treatment limits its use. A long-term efficacy with a double-blind study may be need to reevaluate the efficacy of the treatment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sujata, for a crisp presentation. With this, I think we move to the next speaker. It's Dr. Nitin Balkrishnan. Sir, can you share your screen? Yeah, we can see your screen, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Parul, for having me in such an interesting course of yours. India over the years has been almost a hotbed for meibomian gland disease, and the prevalence of the dry eye is basically increasing rampantly. And the peer-reviewed literature has also proved that the dry eye incidence due to meibomian gland disease, especially all over the world, is on an increase. So in today's era, with unhealthy food habits, increased screen time, increased use of air conditioning, the dry eye has really caused a sort of an epidemic. And this dry eye basically, like has been explained before, is either two types, either an aqueous dry, a deficient dry eye, or an evaporative dry eye. And in most of these cases, drops alone are not sufficient, especially in the severe cases. And there is a need for the newer treatment modalities for MGD and dry eye. These newer modalities, as already a few have been spoken about, this slide basically lists the various newer treatment modalities. And I would be basically talking about the IRPL or the EI. The EI basically is an intense regulated pulse light therapy, and it is especially useful only in meibomian gland dysfunction. The basic advantage of the EI is that it's got a flash lamp technology that makes it possible to achieve neurological stimulation. It's a regulated flash delivery, and it is 20 to 25% more effective than conventional IPL treatment. And almost 87% of the patients develop a better satisfaction rate even after the first treatment. So this is a general comparison between the EI and the conventional IPL devices. The main difference basically being the IPL devices are basically for the treatment of the skin conditions, and it follows a vascular mechanism of action which is linked to the skin rosacea, and it is incompatible with the neurological stimulation. And therefore, the efficacy rate in the IPL devices is much lower as compared to the IRPL devices. So what are the steps to perform an EI? Basically, we need to see that there are no contraindications. Generally, pregnant patients, patients with very dark skin, patients with some skin disorders, patients with tattoos around the eye or a permanent eye makeup. These are the general contraindications. Make sure that there are no cosmetic products. If there are any cosmetic products around the eye, this should be cleaned before the procedure is done. All the moles or any dark pigmented spots around in the treatment area should be covered with the patches which are supplied with the unit. You see that you put the patient on a safety goggles which cover the eye. Apply a generous quantity of the gel on the lower lid, following which you adjust the power depending on the skin tone. So the unit comes with a skin tone chart, and depending on the skin tone, you could go in for the power from 9.8 to 13 joules per centimeter square. So all the safety measures are then unlocked. It is important that the applicator uses his own safety goggles, following which the procedure is started and 5 flashes are applied, starting from the inner canthus and ending in the temporal region, as well as a shot is given in the zygomatic area. And this is then repeated on the other side, following with the removal of the gel. So this is a video which depicts, so what happens is, in a meibomian gland disease, since the meibum is not expressed, there's a deficient lipid layer. And with the EI treatment, what we explained, this is how the power is selected. And having done that, we need to validate all the warnings. So all the warnings are being validated over here in this screen. And once this is done, the machine is ready to give the EI treatment. The patient is now prepared. So the treatment, the eyes are covered with a safety goggles. A copious amount of the gel is applied to the treatment area, and the flashes are delivered. Now, how this basically treats is that there is a afferent stimulation through the zygomatic nerve, which leads to an efferent pathway to the parasympathetic nerves for both the lacrimal glands and the meibomian glands, and it helps to release the meibum and re-regularize the lipid layer. So these are some of the literature searches which we did, and this was an article by Caballero et al., and which showed that it was helpful to treat the evaporative dry eye syndrome produced by the meibomian gland disease. Basically, this was effective in both the eyes which had no surgeries, no prior surgeries, as well as the eyes treated with phacoemulsification and PRK. Both had favorable outcomes following the EI treatment. Again, this was another study by Emin Caraca et al., and which showed the safe treatment procedure for meibomian gland dysfunction and an improvement in the tear film quality and reduction of the symptoms of dry eye. Generally, quite a few other studies also revealed that there was an improvement of the breakup time, improvement of the Schirmer score, and basically there was a symptomatic relief which the patient had. So who can benefit from it? Basically, dry eye, which is predominantly evaporative in nature, pre-LASIK patients with MGD and dry eye, prior to multifocal IOLs with patients with MGD, glaucoma patients who are intolerant to drugs, patients with contact lens intolerance, patients basically which have pain without pain type of dry eye, the post-cataract surgery dryness, as well as the post-refractive surgery dryness. So basically the treatment protocol includes 3 compulsory treatments, day 0, day 15, and day 45, with the 4th treatment on day 75, which is optional. So how do we assess the treatment, the success of this treatment? Basically, at every visit, we need to do a Schirmer strip test, and Oxford grading for staining is done at every visit to see the improvement. Again, an OSDI score for the subjective improvement is done on every visit, and an IDRA analysis, which is an ocular surface analyzer, is done to measure the to check the mammographies, to check the NIBUT, to check for the lipid layer thickness and the tear meniscus height. So these are some of the cases. Here is a case of a moderate MGD, which was prior to doing refractive surgery. This patient underwent a refractive surgery without any treatment to the MGD, with any sort of IRPL treatment to the MGD. Basically, the patient was only on warm compresses. And we found that this patient developed quite a severe DLK following the LASIK surgery. Whereas, on the contrary, a preoperative MGD patient here, given a preoperative IRPL treatment, only a single sitting was given in this case before the refractive surgery, and the outcomes were much, much improved. In cases of a severe MGD with a grade 3 loss of the meibomian glands and a very, very poor lipid layer, as can be seen in this slide, a multi-treatment approach is warranted. So basically, we need to do the lid compressions, we need to do the lid massage, as well as a combination with IRPL and an addition with topical steroids, topical cyclosporin, and vitamin D supplements to give a good result. Another case scenario where you have a rheumatoid arthritis patient who's got rheumatoid arthritis since almost 15 years with the symptoms of typical dry eyes. On examination, shows no loss of meibomian glands, a normal lipid layer, as can be seen here. The normal lipid color is seen over here. However, this patient has a lower tear meniscus height, a low NIBUT. So obviously, this is an aqueous deficient dry eye, and such cases would definitely not benefit with an ERPL treatment. The published data also proves that in cases of rheumatoid arthritis, IRPL treatment is therefore not effective. And the recommended treatment here would be a combination of steroids, topical steroids, cyclosporin, lubricants including trehalose, topical tacrolimus ointment, as well as in severe cases an autologous serum. So in conclusion, the IRPL is approved and tested treatment for evaporative dry eyes, MGD, and lipid layer deficiency. It is useful prior to refractive surgery in patients with MGD and can be considered in symptomatic post-operative refractive patients. It's useful prior to cataract surgery, especially in premium IOL cases in patients with pre-existing MGD, and can be considered in the symptomatic treatment in cases of post-operative dryness. Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin, for a nice presentation. With this, we move on to
Parul, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we could hear. I could hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So with this, we move to the next talk, which is on LipiView by Dr. Karishma. So Karishma, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Can you all see my slides?
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Yes, ma'am. Please share the screen.
Okay. So, thank you, Dr. Parul, for having me included in this instruction course. So, I'm going to be speaking about the role of LipiView in MGD, its impact on cataract and refractive surgery outcomes. Now, we all know that MGD is everywhere. It's causing symptoms of dry eye. It has an impact in our cataract evaluation, because nowadays, to evaluate premium IOL patients, we are including a good topography and a good optical biometry. So in case our tear film is disrupted, then this will influence our evaluation and may give us wrong estimation of the patient's cylindrical power, which ultimately results in a compromise in our surgical precision for results. And also, most importantly, what bothers all of us as cataract surgeons is that it affects the post-operative outcome of the patient, because of which the chair time post-op is massively increased. Now, the first LipiView machine in Asia had come to Narayan Nethralaya back in 2012 when I was doing my fellowship over there. It works on the principle of interferometric color patterns because of the spectrometer light that is shone onto the tear film, and the reflection of that light gives us the estimation of the amount of lipids that are in the tear film because of the specular reflection. So just to show you, this is what a good LipiView would look like, where you can see a lot of colored patterns in the tear film itself, yellows and blues and multiple colors. And each time the patient blinks, it also shows you how the colors get spread. This also gives you an idea of the pattern of the blinking of the patient. So apart from blink rate, it tells you whether the patient has a complete blink. In this video, you could see the patient had an incomplete blink. That is also a cause for their dry eye. So it kind of gives you a real-time imaging of that patient. This, as opposed to that, is a poor lippy view, whereas you can see there is no color pattern in the tear film, which depicts the fact that the lipid layer is significantly less in such a patient. So the visualization is very good because of their high resolution cameras. Now the main disadvantage back then in 2012 was it only told you about the quality of the tear film and the lipid layer thickness, which was estimated by that machine itself. But at that time, we had to do mebography separately, which could give us the anatomy and the morphology of the meibomian glands. So this was a big disadvantage. Back then, we had to couple the LipiView with the Keratograph 5, which was available for us at Narayan Nethralaya, so that we could get a good infrared imaging of the meibomian glands. Then came along LipiView 2, which incorporated mebography within their system. So then it became a little more comprehensive because now you had tear film assessment, lipid layer thickness, as well as the actual mebography to show us the meibomian glands. So the typical way that you need to analyze the patient if you are using it with the LipiView is this was produced by Tear Science back then, and now it has been handed over to J&J. So they provide you with a speed questionnaire, which is like a dry eye questionnaire. It is a standard patient evaluation of eye dryness. And based on the scores, you can decide how severe the patient's dry eye is. They also provide you with a meibomian gland expressor. This is very good because when you are pressing on the meibomian glands physically, with your own finger, there is a different level of pressure that you may be applying on all the glands. This particular device allows you to exert only a fixed pressure on the meibomian glands, allowing you to assess them without any inter-user variability. This is what the LipiView report would look like, where it shows you the lipid layer thickness, the actual imaging of the meibomian glands, and the blink dynamics across the video image that was taken. After that, this can be coupled with your LipiFlow. So in your LipiFlow treatment, that is specifically designed as a treatment for dry eyes, which is first evaluated with the LipiView. So this is how the console is inserted into the eye. It's done under topical anesthesia. The plunger is disposable for each patient, and you first put it under the lower lid and then under the upper lid. There is a space that is maintained between the cornea and the plunger, but you can also use some viscous lubricating eye drop in order to make sure that you don't scratch or touch the cornea. And the actual LipiFlow is my video is playing. So the best part about this is that it uses vector thermal pulsation treatment. So not only does it increase the temperature locally and right over there in conjunction with your eyelids, but it also presses them. So it's not just heat, but it's also expression of the glands. This is the reason why I think that by far this technology should be working much more effectively than other treatments, because apart from direct heat onto the upper and the lower lid where your meibomian glands are there, it is also helping in expressibility of the secretions. Now, what is the role in dry eye? So there are a number of studies that have been done even in the IOVS, and this one particular study is regarding the treatment of MGD with LipiFlow, and it shows that it significantly improves the meibomian gland function parameters following just a single treatment. The question is up to when? So these studies were done up to 2 weeks and 4-week visits, which is quite a short time for such an expensive treatment. Coming to the next study, they talk about the fact that again, it was more effective than just plain and simple warm compress. But again, the question is how long? Again, this study also, the patients were evaluated only up to 2 and 4 weeks. The third study is comparing the effect of LipiFlow on obstructive and hyposecretory MGD. Now, this is very interesting. Normally, you would want to use any of these dry eye treatment devices in patients who have obstructive MGD because you want to increase the expressibility of the glands. And you will not use it in hyposecretory or atrophic MGD because the glands are atrophic. So this showed that very nicely that it is only useful in that if you have atrophic MGD, then you might not want to consider this procedure. The role of MGD and cataract surgery has already been assessed in a number of studies. And basically, it has been proved that the patient's lipid layer thickness is significantly thinner after a cataract surgery, because of which the dry eye symptoms and MGD parameters of these patients deteriorate after a cataract surgery. Knowing this, this is the reason why most of us also have started incorporating lubricating eye drops in our post-op regimen. So what is the use of devices like LipiFlow in cataract surgery? When you use them, there's this one particular study in the American Journal of Ophthalmology as recent as May 2021, where it shows that a preoperative LipiFlow, if done before the cataract surgery, is better not only for the patients who are having preoperative classic MGD, but also who are having milder symptoms or baseline MGD, because we know that dry eye is going to be induced by any ocular surgery. So you might want to warn such patients, and if they are willing, the baseline MGD also can be treated. Of course, if they have definite MGD, it's always a good idea to treat your MGD first and then plan for a cataract surgery. There is another study which shows that the unsatisfied patient after cataract surgery is the huge contributor is your ocular surface disease itself. And so treating these patients preoperatively would save you a lot of, and it give you better visual outcomes. More importantly, it gives you a better visual outcome of the surgery. I think the main limitation of this treatment, even though I think it's a wonderful treatment, the main limitation is a prohibitive cost. Now you have so many other cheaper alternatives that we would possibly not keep it at the top of our list. And of course, the duration of efficacy is questionable. There are, from personal experience, whatever few patient cohorts that we have analyzed show that the patient's symptoms are reduced at least up to 6 months. But again, we have not really taken up those patients for longer time evaluation. So I would suggest using it with caution in a country like India, where cost is such an important factor, not only for the patient, but also for us to invest in such an equipment. You would have to play your game wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karishma, for a wonderful presentation. So with this, I think we come to the last speaker. It's Nupur Goyal. Nupur, over to you for your talk.
I'll just share my screen. Yeah, my screen is visible.
It's visible, Nupur.
I'll just put it on slideshow.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah. So a very good evening, everyone. So coming to the last talk of the day, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Parul, ma'am, for including me in this IC, very, very interesting IC. And I will be talking on tackling those bumps on the road. Okay, so the various advances in management of chalazia. So yeah. So before I begin, I would like to give certain acknowledgements to Dr. Nandini Botra, who's a consultant at LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad, the photography department of LV Prasad, and Dr. Arpita Nayak. These people have helped me put together this presentation and helped me with the clinical pictures. So chalazion is derived from the Greek word chalaza, which means a hailstone or a lump, and it was described as early as in 1700s. So, but before we really move on to further discussion on chalazion, why do we need to discuss chalazion in this IC? So the topic of our IC is harmony of the lids and the disharmony of the lids and the ocular surface. So chalazion is basically a disharmony. So as you can see, it's sort of a vicious cycle. The pathophysiology is a vicious cycle. It can start with a meibomian gland block, because of which the normal medium is not secreted. There is abnormal medium, and it in turn leads to chronic inflammation and the lipogranulomatosis inflammation of the meibomian gland, and further the nodule, which presents as the chalazion. The other, this is one interesting article as I was going through the literature search. Already Dr. Parul has shown the meibographic characteristics of chalazion. When there's a chalazion, the meibomian glands cannot be made out. So they studied actually the meibographic characteristics pre and post chalazion treatment. So post treatment, they realized that in the place where the chalazion was there, after treatment, there was loss of meibomian gland. So there is something to probably, look forward to. So this further accentuates the disharmony that occurs between the meibomian glands, and it leads to the formation of the chalazion. So the clinical concerns, the clinical features, so it generally presents as a solitary nodule, which is non-tender since it's a chronic inflammation. And once you evert the lid, since the meibomian glands are tarsal, you will see a tarsal complement. The clinical concerns, which are again a disharmony, is the cosmetic blemish, which is the main concern. And sometimes it is large enough to obscure vision, which rarely occurs. Which is a point of importance is it has the effect on refractive surgery, and what are the effects that it can lead to lower order aberrations, higher order aberrations, and dry eyes, which leads to disturbance of the tear layer components. It can also have a bearing on the planning of the intraocular surgery, because you need to, if you have a patient with chalazion, you need to look out for associated conditions like blepharitis and meibomian gland disease, because this may predispose to an endophthalmitis due to staphylococcal infection. So the other thing which one needs to understand is that every bump on the lid is not a chalazion. So there are differential diagnoses to be considered in case of localized swelling. So besides chalazion, what you can consider is epidermoid cyst, epithelial inclusion cyst, and sebaceous gland carcinoma. So these are the various clinical pictures. An epidermoid cyst would, so the key to diagnosis for a chalazion would be everting the lid and checking. So as you can see, the presentation in an epidermoid cyst, in an inclusion cyst, it would be more of a translucent kind of a thing. The hordeolum on the other end would be a more acute presentation with pain and tenderness, which would be absent in a chalazion. So this is again a table of differentiation between hordeolum or a stye and a chalazion. So the treatment, it is important to know, because for a hordeolum, you would go in for an antibiotic treatment, and chalazion being a lipogranulomatous inflammation, there is limited role of an acute treatment. So now, how do you tackle the bump? So the various modalities that we are aware of and have been described is the most is the conservative management in form of warm compress, lid massage, and topical antibiotic. The other is we obviously go for an incision curettage. Also, the newer treatment, or what is recently coming up, is the injectable treatment in form of intralesional steroids, intralesional 5-FU, intralesional Botox injections as well. So conservative treatment, so this is a clinical picture showing a patient who had a chalazion, and with conservative treatment of with warm compressive lid massage, she nicely resolved within a period of 2 to 3 months. So incision curettage, we all are aware of the instruments used. I will not, quickly just brush through this. So the chalazion clamp, so we know that there are 2 limbs to it. There's a flat limb and there is the ring limb. The chalazion scoop, which is used for scooping out the lipogranulomatous contents of the chalazion. It comes in various sizes. So this is a typical procedure of incision and curettage. You can see that first the chalazion is localized with the help of a clamp. A cruciate incision is taken, and all the contents are scooped out. So this is again incision curettage. So injectable treatment mainly comes into play. The main indications are whenever there's a multiple chalazia, there is a peripunctal chalazion, there is any recurrent or residual chalazion, and the patient is not willing for INC. So to make it simple, this is very nice article by Dr. Nandini Botra, where they have given, you can remember it as 3 M's: multiple chalazion, marginal chalazion, and medial chalazion, or the peripunctal chalazion. So the technique of the intralesional steroid is basically, the steroid used is the triamcinolone in the dosage of 40 milligram per ml. So after giving the local anesthesia, you evert the lid, inject it transconjunctivally in the chalazion, and a 1 ml syringe is used with a 26 gauge needle, and the dose is 0.2 to 0.3 ml of a 40 milligram concentration of triamcinolone. So post-injection protocol which is followed is antibiotic ointment for a week, and gentle massage over the chalazion 2 times a day for 5 to 10 minutes. So the effect of the intralesional steroid is apparent in about 2 to 5 weeks. Multiple injections up to 2 may be required for a complete resolution. Side effects are hypopigmentation of the skin. Hence, we prefer the transconjunctival injection, because that avoids this side effect. Serious complications like retinal and choroidal vascular occlusion can occur, but with such a small dose, it is unlikely to occur in such cases. The advantage is obviously the simplicity of procedure, the ability to inject it near the lacrimal punctum, and it can be used as an alternative to surgery in case of multiple small and marginal chalazion, where surgery is not a feasible option, and it can lead to aesthetic defects. 5 intravesical injection for Calazion has been described, although I do not personally have any experience with this. If any of the audience or any of the co-instructors have it, I would be happy to know their experience. This is described. This is preferred in patients who are steroid responders and not responding to any other treatment. The resolution timeline which has been described is that conservative management. It is effective in 46% of the cases, and it takes approximately some few weeks to months for complete resolution. The intranasal steroid is effective in 84% of the time, and it takes approximately 2.5 weeks. And the incision curettage is effective in 87% of the time and takes about 1 week for complete resolution. So coming to special considerations, I would just, marginal chalazia. So it's a difficult to treat thing because, if at the margin you try and do an incision curettage, it will lead to a lid notching. So the preferred, you can consider an intralesional steroid as the first modality of treatment in such a case. So this is again a marginal chalazia, and this also has the tarsal component to it. So as you can see, there are two components in this case. So the treatment that if you plan to do an incision and curettage is that you do a separate incision and curettage for both the lesions, the tarsal and the marginal lesion. So if you feel that the contents that have been scooped out are very, very granulomatous, intralesional steroid can also be given, but that would be for the tarsal thing. So the peripunctal calazion, one thing you need to keep in mind is that you can confuse it with a canaliculitis. So what you need to note is the epicenter. This is within the ciliary portion of the eyelid. So that's the way you can differentiate it from a canaliculitis. It would be more, you will not, find the epicenter would not be in the ciliary portion. And so as you can see that this is patient 1, patient 2, both have a similar, they have a nodule. So when you actually evert, you can see that, there is, this is the peripunctal calazion. And so that eversion and looking carefully at the canalicular opening and epicenter of the lesion is very important in a peripunctal pathology. So another thing to consider is a recurrent chalazio. So it is usually because of the failure to eliminate bacteria completely rather than from new infections. You must consider a few systemic associated conditions which can lead to recurrent chalazia, like blepharitis, MGD, acne rosacea, systemic illness. So treatment options remain the same. You can start off with a conservative treatment. Oral antibiotics can be given if there's associated blepharitis. And cyclosporin can be considered in case of severe ocular surface disease. And one thing important, if it is recurrent and the age of the patient, you evert the eyelid, you need to consider a biopsy to rule out a sebaceous gland carcinoma. So this thing needs to be kept in mind. So with this, I conclude, and just the take-home message is that every bump on the eyelid is not a calazion. Keep your differentials in mind. Evert the lid every time. That would give you the proper clue to your diagnosis. And injectable steroids should be considered as a treatment modality. Always remember the 3 M's. In this can be considered as a primary treatment modality: multiple chalazia, medial chalazia, and the marginal chalazia. Thank you so much for the patient listening. With this, I would end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nupur, for a very crisp presentation. I think with this, we move on to the discussion. So I would like to ask Dr. Sujata. Sujata, how do you clinically diagnose a case of meibomian gland dysfunction in a patient who is coming to you in your normal clinics? So what actually tells you that this patient has an MGD? So how do you assess?
Yeah, I'll go as per the traditional teaching. Start with the symptom. The patients complain of burning sensation again, which is more severe in the afternoon or evening time. After the history, typical symptoms, then the slit lamp examination before going to the latest technology. See the lid margin with the and any meibomian gland like Pradhi discharge or hyperemic lead margin thickening, all those. Then I'll go the simple test like tear breakup time. Yeah, this will be the at least minimum test to diagnose meibomian gland. Or history like acne rosacea. You can see there's not a history. You can see from the face. You need to rule out acne rosacea can be, although it is difficult in our country, but it can be ruled out.
And how important is the expression of the meibomian glands, to know the MGD?
Yeah, it is definitely important, but as I discussed, the worm completion, usually people are not compliant. Even if you describe typical method of massage, they won't do. This compliance is the biggest issue. I always tell them that like blepharitis, you clean the same thing, you do this at least once or twice in a day, but the compliance is usually poor, but it is important. It is important.
Yeah. So do we have Dr. Nitin Balakrishnan here? Sir, I wanted to know about your experience about the meibography. So you have a meibography machine. So I just would like to know, how do you assess your patients on a meibography?
The basic thing with meibography, which we have found, is that it's not a very simple thing to be done by the optometrist or by the technician, because everting the lid in these patients who have already got severe MGD is quite a difficult task. Again, to capture a good picture, it takes about a minute, minute and a half, and to keep the lid everted for that long is difficult. The newer meibographers come with an auto plotting of the area which is scanned, and believe me, most of the time the auto plotting is way off. It is plotted an area where it is plotted such a small area that the percentage loss will be much higher than when it plots the whole area of the entire surface. When you leave the plotting, the manual plotting again to the technicians, they just do a rough job. So every case of meibography which is done, I insist that one of our consultants sees that particular thing, particular test, and does the plotting ourselves, the manual plotting, and only then you can get consistent results.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Nitin. Same thing with me. So I also have a meibographer. So I definitely work with an optometrist. I have actually trained them, but still, many a times the lid eversion is not so easy in all patients. So you may have floppy lids, you may have thick lids, and it is not possible to get a good eversion of the lid without folds, without reflexes. And if you have all of these, the meibographic images would not be really very great. So I think it's important to train our assistants before we really rely on the images that are captured by them. And same here, I don't have an auto plotting with my machine, but I always believe on a manual. So same thing with topographer. Like, we used to believe that when you look at a topography to diagnose a keratoconus, we would never look at an index. So same thing with meibography. I still look at the manual. I look at the glands and then assess the amount of meibobin gland dropout. So Karishma, you also have worked with a meibographer. So what is your experience?
So adding to what you all said, I think one simple thing that we tend to forget even in the consulting room is, especially because all of us have got air conditioners on, the technicians tend to forget that the first thing you need to do when you're doing the meibography is turn off the air conditioner. Second thing is, the patient already is having dry eye, so he's already squeezing their eyes. And then, like you all mentioned, it's even a bigger challenge to ask them to open their eyes if they already have dry eyes. A thing that's very important with girls is that they have applied some sort of eye makeup and cum, which will grossly give us wrong readings. Now, there are two aspects to this. There are oil-based makeup products, which will give you a false high level of lipid layer thickness because they have oily secretions in them. And on the other hand, if you tell them to remove their eye makeup and cum, there are oil-based cleansers. So again, it gives you a false reading. So what we tell them is no eye makeup, no contact lenses for, so ideally you're supposed to not have it for the past 12 hours. But for the safety sake, like Sujata ma'am mentioned, there is no compliance. So you just tell them 2 days, no contact lens, 2 days, no eye makeup, and then call them for an evaluation in an ideal situation. And secondly, I think that you need to emphasize to them the importance of how, when we are clicking that image, to get a good quality of the tear film, you just have to tell them that hold on and stare for a few seconds. Otherwise, it's really difficult. Like you all said, ultimately, it boils down to us having to intervene.
So Karishma, any features that you have seen more commonly, So we understand that the MGD dropout is the most common thing which we associate with MGD. But any other morphology that you have seen with obstructive type or, you know?
So the curvy pattern,
Yeah.
the absolutely, so there would be normally I mean, the structure would be just straight going down. But when it's excessively curvy or there are loops sometimes, so the terminology that we had been told back then, self-named of course, was stressed glands. So those are the patients that I believe would benefit more from a treatment, because at least they have glands. So then when they have glands, that there is something for them to, you know, work on. And another controversy is that, so typically they always say that if you have atrophic MGD or if you have aqueous tear deficiency, you should not treat these patients. But there is another differing thought which says that yes, they already have aqueous tear deficiency, so try to conserve whatever lipid they have. So the other absolutely opposing thought, which has not been studied, I agree, but it's something to ponder about, is that if there is a patient with aqueous tear deficiency and we know that they're not possibly going to benefit with a dry eye treatment, maybe you should at least offer it to them, because you can conserve whatever little tears they have with the help of the dry eye treatment.
Dr. Nitin, you can comment.
I just had one small thing, is a small warning that in this COVID era, we've had this problem. Most of the optometrists who are everting the lids very often do it by just taking the sanitizer on their hand just before. And we've had a patient who developed a severe corneal erosion following a mammography. So just a warning to everyone, to warn your technicians that they need to dry their hands following the sanitizer before everting the lid.
Yeah, no. Aditya, I have one question. Is that you talked about the use of tea tree oil in Demodex
Yes.
infections. So could you just tell us how do you use it and what is the concentration and where is it available?
Yeah, actually earlier I used to tell my patients to buy the pure tea tree oil either from Flipkart or Amazon and then dilute it 50% with a non-essential oil and then apply it. But it's very difficult. Tea tree oil is quite expensive. You don't know whether it is genuine or fake because it's from an e-commerce website. So now one company has come up with I'll tell you the trade name, I have no financial interest. It is Oculeaf Lead Cleanser. So the Oculeaf Lead Cleanser is available either as a bottle form. It is sort of a shampoo kind of a formulation and also available as a lid wipe. So that contains tea tree oil. So I am instructing the patient with the wipes are more expensive. The bottle is cheaper. So you just take a small amount of that foamy kind of a substance on your hands and then tell the patient to apply it to their lid margins and wash the face off. So it's working quite well in that.
And how long do you use it before stopping it? So
the lead cleanser, at least I tell them at least daily for 4 to 6 weeks. And then as and when they remember to, you know, clean their lids maybe once a week or, you know.
So Dr. Aditya and Dr. Sujata, your experience with omega-3 fatty acid supplement, because I usually don't give it, you know, I really don't feel they really work. But what is your experience?
I don't give, Parul. It's quite expensive.
Also,
It was also, I think Aditya can.
It definitely, I agree. The cost for a 6-month therapy at 1 gram per day is around 8,000 rupees. So most of the patients give it for a month or so and then they start dropping out. But in the very desperate or the end stage, you know, MGD, I do tell them, ki, okay, the studies are out on this. Some say yes, some say no. If you can, because some of them do read the literature and come to the clinic. So I tell them, chance le lo. And the other benefit is it has a very strong general anti-inflammatory effect on the body. So many of the cardiologists, the neurologists are prescribing it for some different unrelated, you know, condition. So if they're already taking that, let them continue. Or in the desperate situation, and if the patient can afford it, yes, why not?
okay. So Karishma, do you have any comment on this?
Yes, I agree. I just have one thing to add. Initially, before Oculeaf had come out, we were prescribing the tea tree oil that used to come from, there are two commercial companies, again, no financial interest, Himalaya and Body Shop. But like Dr. Aditya mentioned, they are very expensive. But the Himalaya one was slightly cheaper and a lot of patients we had prescribed that particular product too. But yes, I have also switched over to using Oculeaf after they introduced it. So yeah.
So Nitin, I just wanted to ask about the IPL therapy. So how do you actually titrate the power? So
So the unit comes with a skin tone chart. So you match the skin tone to the patient's skin tone. And ideally, what we would do is go one step lower than the prescribed power setting on the skin tone chart. So for example, if it shows 13 joules, I would go in for one step lower and do the 11 joule treatment.
okay, and do you tend to do a single row or a double row therapy for IPL?
It's a single row treatment. There are 5 shots which are used on each eye. 4 are applied to the lower lid and 1 is to the temporal area over here. So the temporal shot is supposedly the one which acts on the parasympathetic nerves for the upper lid, and the 4 lower shots are for the lower lid meibomian gland.
So how long, I mean, how many maximum number of treatment that you have given to a patient, you know? Can you tell us that?
I have followed the protocol and done 3 treatments, 0, 15, 45. The 4th treatment I have done only in about maybe less than 5% of the cases where we've been using this unit for more than 2 years now. So especially these patients who come back after about 1.5 years with symptoms again. And believe me, some of the patients ask for the treatment. They say that the symptomatic relief was so good with the previous treatment that they want one more sitting, especially when the symptoms have started recurring.
So any complications in terms of depigmentation or burns that you have?
We have not seen any complications per se. One very unrelated, but I don't think it's got anything to do with the IPL treatment, is an elderly patient developed a vitreous hemorrhage in one of his eyes. But I don't think he was a diabetic and must have been unrelated cause. But that's the only sort of sequelae which we have had following an IPL treatment.
Yeah. Okay. Karishma, your experience, because you have, I think, worked on both the systems, the LipiFlow as well as the IPL. So your take on the 2 treatments and comparison.
So I have no study to back me up on this, but in general, I felt that the patient satisfaction with IPL has been much lesser than the patient satisfaction with LipiFlow. Now, my personal opinion is, like I said, because of the fact that there is actually a pressure along with the thermal pulsation that the LipiFlow gives, I feel that it makes more sense because that is actually pushing it out, whereas the IPL is just giving you shots and using, a neural pathway. So this is my personal opinion, but just looking at the patient satisfaction, now I don't know whether it was the amount of money that was put in, so they were telling themselves that yes, we are feeling better, but I felt that the LipiFlow patients were doing much better and for a longer duration of time is what I seem to have noticed. In my private practice, I have only had access to IPL, and I'm not seeing that much of a wow factor as much as I got with a LipiFlow even back then in 2012.
So do you think in severe cases where IPL may not be adequate, a mechanical expression is something which we should be looking at? Any experience of any of the panelists with the mechanical expression?
I do not advise, means whatever IPL I do, I tell them that this is just kind of one push or one nudge that we are giving you, but after that you have to do warm compress as well as expression back home every day. This is just an additional add-on treatment to kind of wake your glands up and give them that, one jhatka to start functioning. So I don't stop the...
Yeah. Any experience of the panelists with the OPD mechanical expression or the indoor-based? So with the MGD probes. So anyone has any experience with that? Okay. So I think in a severe cases, I think we should be looking at having a when we are looking at an IPL therapy, I think mechanical expression makes sense, either with the help of forceps or with the help of the probes that are available, MGD probes. I have some question for Nupur. Nupur, you talked about the intralesional steroids. So are there any cases where you use topical steroids also? In management of chalazia?
I have per se not used any topical, only except the Occupol DX eye ointment for a
Yeah,
conservative
but in which indications would you use it? So, I
for a
mean,
topical steroid.
yes, yeah. The indications in chalazion. So when you have
Topical steroid,
myeloma,
I don't. I mean, it's. I am a little conservative in using topical steroids, anyways. So knowing that chalazion is a lid pathology, the intralesional would unnecessarily subject the patient to a topical steroid is something that.
many times we see patients where there is a chalazion is dying out, and you see a granuloma on the
With all
underside.
due respect, sorry to interrupt, doctors, the time is up.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. You can just sum it up within the next 30 seconds if you
So,
want.
yeah. Yeah, thank you all the panelists, all the speakers. Thank you AIOS for giving us this platform, and it was a wonderful session and a wonderful talks from all the speakers. Thank you, everyone.
Let me take an
Thank you,
opportunity to
Dr.
thank our
Parul. Thank you.
chairperson, Dr. Parul M. Deshpande, and all the speakers who just gave us such an informative session for AIOC. Thank you so much and have a nice day ahead.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.